Thank you so much for joining us for Spirit, the stimulating program initiative for retirees that inspires thought. I'm Judy Steinig, Director of Community Services for the Orthodox Union, and it is my honor to host this program. The OU created Spirit several years ago as an on-site program that was held in New York, New Jersey, and Florida. After a hiatus of a couple of years, we are happy to bring it back now as a pre-PASOK virtual program. The OU recognizes that as the generation of baby boomers leave their professional responsibilities, they are looking for educational stimulation. The goal of the Spirit program is to provide active retirees with opportunities for spiritual and intellectual growth. As soon as the OU became aware of the challenges being encountered by the over 60 population with regard to coronavirus, we realized that Spirit would be the perfect way to engage our retirees in a virtual setting. We are privileged to welcome Dr. DITZA BERGER of Lander College for Women to our Spirit program. Dr. BERGER will be addressing coping tools for an unfolding crisis. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the program and stay tuned for our post-PASOK programming. If you know anyone who is missing today's program, please tell them to contact me at Steinig, STEINIGJ @OU.org, and we'll be happy to give them a copy of the recording. Also, if you would like a copy of Dr. Berger's handouts that you're going to be seeing, the PowerPoint, please email me as well, any of you tuning in now. Stay strong, keep safe, and be healthy, and a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Dr. Berger, take it away.
Thank you very, very much, Representative Steinig. I guess before I start, the first thing that I want to do is thank both Representative Steinig and Representative Dr. Schmidman for inviting me to do this. I've known Representative Schmidman for a long time, and I've had the opportunity to work with her on other Women's Initiative programs. Honestly, we're in a very, very tough situation. We're in a tough situation, the likes of which I think none of us have ever experienced. And Baruch Hashem, what I can say with tremendous gratitude to the Jewish community and to the community at large, the recognition that people need to be actively thinking and actively busy is something that people have been taking very, very seriously. Inasmuch, I am not the first person presenting this topic. I've actually had the pleasure of watching several others present on this topic, and it's highly unlikely that anything that I say will be fully unique. However, with that being said, my goal in today's presentation is to kind of refresh our memories and activate some of the ideas that we may have somewhere so that we can really use them to help ourselves. It's a reality. Many of us are very limited in terms of where we can go and who we can be with. We have a degree of what we would call physical isolation. I think thanks to the programming that organizations like the OU are doing, it doesn't have to also be social isolation. So while we're in our own places, and that is definitely very, very difficult and very limiting, there are things that we can do not only on a practical level, but beyond these programs in terms of connecting socially with others, and that's actually going to be one of the things that I'm going to focus on. Okay, with that, we love predictability. We love certainty. We love to feel like we have a certain degree of control. The reality is that when we don't have these things, and this situation is a prime example of where we see how limited our control is, and we don't know what comes next, when we don't have those things, we often experience anxiety. And that's normal, and that's real. And one of the things that we're going to look at today are those things that we actually have some control over, because that actually can make us feel somewhat better. One of the titles of the programs that I saw, I don't think I actually saw the program, I think it was a program that was given through OHEL, was I'm Not Okay and That's Okay. The reality is that in a situation like this, we're not always going to feel good, and that's normal. The idea is that we actually do have some control, and that's where coping skills come in. So there are a variety of different categories of coping skills, and we're going to look at each of them, hopefully in some depth, and hopefully at the end of the program, if anyone has ideas that we haven't brought up that they can share with others, I would be very, very grateful, and then I can stick them into the program also. Okay, so the first category that we're going to look at are activities, routines, and diversions. Being busy is healthy and helpful for all of us. And again, being part of a program like this is healthy and helpful. Social and interpersonal skills that we have and social and interpersonal activities can make a very big difference. We're going to look at the category of cognitive coping skills. We're going to look at some physical coping skills, some spiritual coping skills, and we're even going to look at using limit setting, as funny as it sounds, in the process of helping ourselves really cope that much better with a very, very unique and difficult situation. Okay, activities are stabilizing. Routines are stabilizing. That's one of the nice things. We know the sun rises in the morning and sets at night, and knowing what comes next and what to expect is something we all really benefit from. One of the things that I can tell you is that in general, for most people, the routine has been upset. But holding on to those responsibilities and engaging in those things that we have opportunities to do can give us tremendous stability. And we have to think about what our responsibilities often are. Very often we have projects that are bigger projects, and they don't necessarily have to get done now, and it might not be a good idea to get them done now. But recognizing that there are people who need me, there are things that I really need to contribute to, can make a very, very big difference. And obviously engaging in these things can make a big difference also. Which brings me to how Hashem is helping us through the calendar right now, because our responsibilities are not the same on a daily basis. They're not the same on a weekly basis. And certainly when it comes to a cycle of Yom Tovim, preparing for Pesach is a big deal. And I want to speak about this from several different vantage points. The first thing is like this. We need to know what we're doing when we're preparing for Pesach, because there is a real danger in overdoing it. We are there to get rid of chametz. We are not there to shine our baseboards. And I am saying that because one of the things that can really be problematic is for people to take on responsibilities that are not necessary and could be unhealthy and unhelpful. Our goal is not to keep ourselves so busy that we don't have time to breathe. And we'll talk about that a little more in limit setting. It's also not to take on responsibilities that are unnecessary and could actually be dangerous. So if you don't have the household help that you're used to having, and you're not the person who should be climbing a ladder, don't climb the ladder. You don't have to do everything that your household help would otherwise do. You can make a kosher Pesach with dust under the counter. You can be mevatel the crumbs that could have gotten under the radiators. So please be very, very careful with that. Don't end up bending down to do something and hurting your back or chas v'shalom worse, because preparing for Pesach can actually be something that people can enjoy when it's done appropriately. We have to be very wary of the fact that we don't want to do things that could be problematic. Okay, with that being said, a daily schedule is extremely important. Our lives, as from Jews, have schedules built in. We get up in the morning, we daven, we then move on to eating breakfast. The issue is what comes next. And I think it can be very unstabilizing not to know what comes next, which is why I think on a certain level, preemptively planning a schedule that includes responsibilities that you have, but also includes very positive use of what I would call your discretionary time is extremely important. But you want to know what you're going to be doing. And if there's a friend that you're going to be communicating with and you're going to have to make time for that, that's fantastic. But I really do think it gives us a certain amount of security to know what comes next. So I have a couple of different ideas here. Obviously, reading is a very big one. I think that most of us benefit tremendously from reading. Sometimes we can get so engaged in reading that it can actually take our mind elsewhere, which in this case is not necessarily a bad thing. I do think we have to be careful in terms of what we're reading, and we'll talk about this a little more later on. But the idea is that there's a tremendous amount that comes out in the news. There isn't necessarily a balanced reflection of positivity in the world that's coming out in the news. And spending too much time reading about what's going on in the world can actually be very, very dangerous for all of us in terms of how it impacts our mood. So theoretically, we could be hearing the same thing, nothing necessarily changed, but as we hear it repetitively, it does affect us. We learned that from the World Trade Center. We learned that from how people who overwatched reacted to that. In this case, we can talk about watching, we can talk about reading. They're fantastic diversions, but please be careful in terms of the content. You do want to know what's going on in the world. and you should know what's going on in the world, but make sure that you limit it. Make sure that you give yourself a fixed time to be doing something like that can go back into your schedule, and make sure that you don't overdo it. Because one of the differences between the way we get our news now and the way we got our news in the recent past is that we have I guess going along with the problem of preparing for Pesach, we have a system now on the internet where it's literally ein ladavar sof. Okay, we're getting preparing for Pesach that could be ein ladavar sof. We also have to be very, very careful when we are perusing things. We want to make sure that those are things that are going to have positive impact on us, and we're going to talk about that a little bit further on. Okay, the next category that I have here, I'm sorry, everybody's faces are blocking my category, so I'm the one who did that to myself, just a second. The next category that we have here, I think is a category, that's called art, okay? I can't tell you how beneficial and therapeutic engaging in art activities are. And art can be anything from kind of rearranging the pictures on your wall to actually generating and creating things. And having access to supplies is not always natural, but Baruch Hashem, we also have Amazon that delivers things. So whether it's painting, whether it's sculpting, whether it's drawing, whether it's knitting, if we have hobbies that once upon a time filled some of our discretionary time, now is a very, very good time to pick some of them up. Going back to the reading, one of the other things that goes along with that is the idea of learning. So making a chavrusa time and making time to learn something that you haven't had the opportunity to do can be tremendously rewarding. I'm going to throw in gardening. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, but gardening is something that's considered very therapeutic. It appeals to the aesthetic sense, and I know that people can feel very, very cooped in their house. Sometimes even just putting a plant on your windowsill and tending to it can make a very big difference. Music is something that we should avail ourselves of. Everything, you Google it, everything is really, really available, so you don't have to say to yourself, well, I once heard a song, how would I ever find out what it is? You put the words that you remember in the search bar, and miraculously the song will come up. And lastly, there are games. Games are great diversions. And we can play games with whoever we're with, but we can also play games with people that we really care about online. A group of my friends played Boggle the other night. They were in 2 different countries. They had a really good time, and that was available to them online. Okay, with that being said, we're going to go on to our next category, which is social and interpersonal. Okay, if you feel the need to talk to someone, you can be guaranteed that that other person feels that need also. Maybe not necessarily at the same time, and you might have to make a different time to speak with them, but please, please, please reach out. You are doing someone else a favor. You're not just doing yourself a favor. People need connection. We know from the beginning of the Torah, Lo tov heyos ha'adam levado. We do have this physical distancing that's going on, but reach out to people. It means a tremendous amount to them. Now, we used to reach out in different ways, and I think one of the things that actually could be very valuable, obviously we'd have to figure out the logistics of this, and you can certainly do it over email, and there are no logistical problems, but write a note to somebody. Let somebody know that you're thinking about them, and it can mean a lot. Now, this we're going to go into in a minute, but humor is a fantastic way of not only helping yourself, but helping others cope with things, as is the expression of gratitude. When somebody knows that what they've done is meaningful and valuable to me, and I have shared that with them, they feel tremendously good about themselves. And that's something that we really can do. And that leads us right into encouraging others. Again, going back to what I said at the beginning of the slide, it's not unique at this point to be having a hard time. So anything that we can do for somebody else in terms of helping them feel in terms of helping them feel understood in the fact that they might be having a hard time is worth an absolute fortune. Okay, with that, let's look at humor for a second. Okay, now smiling is not something that we always feel like doing. It really isn't. And quite frankly, there are reasons and times where smiling would not be appropriate. However, there are times where we don't feel like smiling, and helping ourselves to smile can make a huge difference. There was something that was called the facial feedback hypothesis. And when people walked around kind of forcing their face into a smile, they actually felt somewhat better. So we're going to look at different ways that we can get ourselves to smile. I don't know if you smiled when I put my pencil in my mouth, but one of the ways that I thought was very, very interesting that I came across was being able to look at the situation that you're in almost as an observer, because it's not normal. And if we could kind of look at these situations and kind of bring a smile to ourselves by saying like, oh, wow, who would have ever thought, in a positive way, like almost looking for the humor in it, we can actually help ourselves. Reach out to friends who can make you laugh. We all have friends who are just a little funnier. And you can pick up the phone and say, I could use a quick pick-me-up. What have you come across lately? If you've come across something funny and you email it to a friend, it's worth a fortune. There are movies, there are shows, there are things that make us laugh. We all have our old favorites. Access them. Part of the schedule should be making time for yourself to do something that can boost your mood. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. Obviously, there are funny books in addition to that. So there are funny movies, there are funny books. There are all kinds of comedians. Again, this is nothing new, but it's something that can be really, really helpful. Okay, the more we focus on the positive things in our lives, close friendships, I guess looking at the future and things that Emrat Hashem hopefully will happen, even if they're not happening now, things that are going well in our life, the more likely it will be that we will enjoy a sense of well-being. And that's really what we're looking at. Positive thinking brings positive responses to your body and can boost your mood and diminish stress. And that's something that I think we can actively help ourselves with, and certainly actively try to help the people in our lives with. Okay, the next category is cognitive. And that has to do with thought. And quite frankly, if I only got to choose one category, this is the category that I would have focused on. Because our thoughts have a tremendous impact in our feelings and in our behaviors, right? Our thoughts can really make a difference in how we see things, and that can make a tremendous difference in how we feel. The issue is that we don't get to choose our thoughts. Our thoughts are automatic. They do pop into our head. Our responsibility lies in how we respond to those thoughts, right? So there are thoughts that just aren't true, right? And those thoughts can be catastrophic thoughts. When we see ourselves thinking them, we likely will notice how we're feeling as well. So if we think, this is I have no idea, you can fill in the blank. This is absolutely, absolutely awful and there's no way it can get better, which is not a true thought. B'ezras Hashem, it will get better. But it is normal for people to catastrophize and to overgeneralize. And that thought is going to cause you tremendous, tremendous anxiety. So being able to say, wow, I'm feeling anxious. And then being able to say, well, what is it that I was thinking can make such a tremendous difference. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of research on this. And just by labeling my feeling, I can help myself function that much more positively. Okay, so recognizing what I'm thinking, identifying those thoughts, and labeling the feeling that I'm experiencing is tremendously powerful. Now, the reality is like this. None of us have experienced this situation. But I think if you think back over your life, there likely have been situations that actually really were difficult. Very, very difficult. Maybe they pale in comparison if you were lining them up on the scale, but that doesn't matter. You managed. And I think one of the things that can really help us cope is to recognize our own resilience and to recognize the fact that we do innately have coping skills. And there are things that we've done in the past, and we want to remind ourselves of those things. We want to both remind ourselves of those things so that we can use them because they're good tools, and also because it gives us a certain sense of self and a certain sense of agency and ability to cope with tough things. So that's a very, very important thing. And if I say things that are contradictory, some of the things I say actually will be contradictory, and that's what we're going to look at now. Lower your expectations of yourself in the situation. I mean that both from a physical production perspective. I have so much time now, I should be doing X, Y, or Z. We want to be doing a lot of things, but sometimes we think bigger than we can actually do. Or I shouldn't be feeling so stressed all the time. We have to be able to help ourselves by saying, it's okay if I'm feeling stressed, because that is a reality here. Inspirational quotes, again, our thoughts affect how we feel. So something that makes you think in a more positive direction can be very, very helpful. Be aware of thinking traps. There are certain tendencies towards thinking in certain directions, and we're going to look at them on another slide, that can be almost, dangerous for us, but once we become aware of them, we can really make a big difference. Using imagery, we'll talk about that in a minute. Using mindfulness, that's another slide that we're going to get to in a minute. And finally, what we said, are limiting the watching of the news, because thinking about things all the time, even if they're true, that doesn't mean it's helpful to think about them. Okay, now, thinking traps. Okay, there are a lot of thinking traps. We call them cognitive distortions also. And I want to just highlight a few of them right now. I want to look at the bottom line first. Catastrophizing. Our brains tend to catastrophize. They tend to see the worst case scenario. And if we can kind of catch that runaway train and say, no, that's actually not likely to happen, we can do ourselves a tremendous favor. Helplessness. We can sometimes see problems as being pervasive and not realize the degree of agency and control that we actually have in our lives. And we want to be able to help ourselves recognize what we can do. Okay, mind reading, and this can come in terms of reaching out to other people. Ugh, they don't have time for me. Why would they want a phone call from me? They have so many people in their family who are probably calling them. I believe I already know what they think. It's not true. And that can actually seriously get in our way. So becoming aware of different forms of thinking traps can make a very, very big difference in terms of how we function. Okay, with that being said, one of the techniques that we use to help ourselves, right, because how I think really affects how I feel, is imagery. We all have, Baruch Hashem, had, in addition to some difficult experiences that we've weathered, some very, very pleasant experiences. We've experienced them, we've read about them, we've heard about them. I can create a mindset for myself that really can create an emotional reaction that's much more positive. By the more senses that I use, like let's say here, this is the scene of the beach, right? So if I really want to imagine myself on the beach and use that imagery, I'm not just imagining a flat picture. I'm imagining those grains of sand as I sift them through my hand. I'm feeling the rays of sun as they beat down on my cheeks. I'm trying very hard to smell that salty smell in the ocean. The more senses that I use, the richer the image becomes and the more beneficial it is, the more engaged you become in it. And quite frankly, I mean, you can try this on your own. There are definitely programs that you can use, but people find this very, very helpful because basically you are where your head is at and you can actually choose to put your head in places or with people who are very, very positive and encouraging. Okay, so that's, and the last thing is while we do that, we try to breathe deeply and calmly as we do something like this. There are people who get training in this. It's a very, very worthwhile tool. The next tool along those lines is mindfulness, right? Our minds, as I said before, have minds of our own. Our thoughts can run all over the place. They can run in futurized directions, not futurized directions that are necessarily helpful. Sometimes it is actually very helpful to think in terms of how we're going to do certain things. But sometimes our minds can run in directions that can really, really be problematic. So it's not just that my tooth really hurts me, but it's my tooth really hurts me and I'm not going to be able to stand it if the pain gets any worse. Well, right now, your tooth has a certain degree of pain and you actually are standing it. So now mindfulness is something, it's a real skill set. People work for weeks and weeks and months on cultivating it, but it's what we call non-judgmental self-awareness, where we're focusing our awareness on what's actually really happening on the present moment. This is what my tooth actually feels like. Or right now, Baruch Hashem, these people are really safe and functioning. And I think it's very, very important for us to kind of be able to pull ourselves into the present. Sometimes what we're dealing with in the present is actually very, very difficult, but very often it's made more difficult by us worrying about where that present can leave. Okay, it is a serious therapeutic technique. I did not do it justice here, but it is something, there are apps that people can download on their phone that can really help cultivate it, and there are people who really work hard on training people in doing it. Okay, now let's move on to the next category. The next category is physical. Okay, so you like our little man here who's running. We don't physically necessarily have to run to be helping ourselves physically, but we do have to look at the basics, because when the basics are taken care of, we're much more able to tolerate things from an emotional perspective. So preemptively, working hard to get enough sleep is extremely important. And I think one of the things that sometimes gets in the way is that very often pre-sleep is what we would call rumination time. Before people fall asleep, they tend to worry about all kinds of things. I would very seriously suggest that choose a different time during the day that can be your worry time when you can think about things. And if something pops into your head before you go to sleep, have a pad next to your bed with a pen so that you can write it down. Like, remember to call X, right? If I have to hold on to that while I'm sleeping, I'm going to have a much harder time falling asleep. Okay, so getting enough sleep is something that's very, very important. If people are having difficulty sleeping, that is something to reach out about because it can be usually helped, and getting that amount of sleep can make a very big difference. Healthy eating. Sometimes people talk about a rainbow diet, right? It's a little harder now because we don't necessarily have the agency to go to the stores ourselves. One of the things that I just saw is that Rabbanim are seriously suggesting that we make very simple Yom Tovim, and we don't necessarily have, the varied side dishes that we might otherwise have. But eating healthy is something we really, really want to focus on. And we want to focus on eating healthy in a kind of regulated way. Very often when people are home all the time, instead of sitting down for meals, they end up grazing, and it's really not as healthful as saying, this is lunchtime and this is what I'm going to be doing. With that, we're talking about getting into a good routine. Exercise. I know you had 2 exercise programs already through this system, and it is something for us to seriously figure out how we can keep in our lives on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be half an hour. Even getting a few minutes of exercise in, and it can be chair exercises, it can be yoga, it can be anything that really speaks to you, can be really helpful. Okay, now, after I speak about exercise, of course I'm going to tell you to go eat chocolate, but the reality is we want to look for physical things that can help us feel better. I'm not talking about eating all the chocolate that was purchased for Yom Tov in one sitting, but I am talking about having something that you can really enjoy, and that's very, very important. The next thing is limiting caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant, okay? Anxiety has a already stimulated physiological system. So if I have a baseline of, stress that's already here, and I add caffeine to it, I really can be raising it much more than I need to. So I would say not avoid caffeine, and certainly stopping caffeine cold turkey is not a good idea. But I would say limit it. So when you're going in for another drink, say to yourself, is there a decaf tea that I can have, or some kind of herbal something, as opposed to having another cup of coffee. I'm definitely speaking to myself when I say this. It is very important. On a physical level, one of the things that we can really do to help ourselves with anxiety and that we can take control of is our breathing. So when I kind of just let my system go and I breathe however I'm breathing, and certainly if I'm doing a lot of breathing in through my mouth, I could end up kind of perpetuating a state that's a little more anxious. If I take control over my breathing, which is easier to take control of on a certain level than my mind, and I help myself by slowly breathing in through my nose, holding it, and then blowing it out through my mouth. I'm breathing in through my nose, and blowing it out through my mouth. I can actually really help myself get back to a more grounded state if I'm more anxious. Breathing is something that takes practice. I know that, Baruch Hashem, we've been doing it since we were born, but breathing in a way that's going to be relaxing takes practice, and it is something for us to seriously consider and say to ourselves, do I want to help myself learn how to do this? And there are apps for this. There's an app that's called Breathe to Relax. There are several different things that we can be doing, or we can just do it on our own. But it takes practice. And quite frankly, when we spoke about getting enough sleep before, right? So one of the things that is actually very helpful is to do some deep and slow breathing before we go to sleep. Just breathe in and out. In through your nose, hold it for 2 seconds, and blow it out through your mouth. The out breath should be slightly longer than the in breath. And those things can be very, very physically soothing. Okay, let's go on. Spirituality. Spirituality has been shown to help us really cope better. People who are connected to a higher being, in our case, people who are connected to Hashem, really have an understanding of the fact that there's someone else in control, that there's something that's really larger and bigger than where we are. And davening can be extremely helpful and therapeutic. Okay, so we have the davening that exists in the siddur, and then we have the davening that we could do at any point during the day, where we literally talk to Hashem, and that can be extremely, extremely helpful. This is going to look a little funny in terms of spirituality, but enjoying nature can be a spiritual experience. When I look up at the sky, like we, tzitzis had that extra blue string, not most tzitzis don't, but hakanaf b'sil techelas, it's supposed to remind me of the sky. Reminding me of the sky is supposed to remind me of the fact that Hashem created the world. Nature is beautiful, and we are limited in our opportunity at this point to explore nature physically. But Baruch Hashem, most of us have windows, and Baruch Hashem, those windows can oversee some beautiful things, and take note of them. Right now, it's a season where the flowers are blooming. Listen to the birds chirping. These are things that can really, really provide a level of calm and soothing. The other thing is like this. We're all on the internet. We can go anywhere in the world now that we want. So there are 7 wonders of the world, and most of us will not have the opportunity in our lifetime to actually physically be present at all of them. There are things in the world that are absolutely magnificent that I know that in all likelihood I'll never go to, but I can go there on my computer. I'm not suggesting we spend hours and hours a day touring other parts of the world, but if it's something that speaks to you and something that can relax you, please do it. The other thing is like this, getting involved in a worthy cause, realizing that there are people who really need support. That can be on a very, very basic level, reaching out to a friend. That can also be on a larger communal level where people need phone calls to be made. And if you think that there's something that you could be doing and you reach out to your local rebbets and you say, is there something that people might need before Yom Tov that I can do from my house? It can make a very big difference. And in all likelihood, it would be phone calls, and those phone calls will be very, very much appreciated, I would believe, by many, many people. Okay, limit setting. I told you I was going to talk about this first, and it sounds very, very funny because it sounds like the opposite. Here I talked about how we're going to make use of our discretionary time, and now I'm talking about dropping some involvement. There are times where our eyes are bigger than our stomachs, our eyes are bigger than our mouths. There are times where we set goals for ourselves that actually aren't realistic. So if you feel yourself getting overwhelmed, please take a very deep breath and say to yourself, whoa, I don't have to do everything. What are the things that are most meaningful? And make sure that when you're creating that schedule, that we don't err on the other side, and you have to keep setting time for yourself. Obviously, there are things that are going to take higher priority, like we can't clean for Pesach 2 weeks from now, so certain things are going to take precedence. But again, cleaning for Pesach doesn't have to be back-breaking labor. And cleaning for Pesach, I had a teacher in Israel who used to talk about the fact that, he used more cleaner and less energy, and that's it. Also, please be careful with cleaners, because fumes from cleaners actually can be unhealthy. So that's something else. Next, what we're trying to create is resilience, right? Here's our little ball that's bouncing back. I don't know if when I point, I'm pointing to the picture on your screen. But the idea of bouncing back from adversity and growing from challenges is not just the big picture idea of Imret Hashem, when this is all over, I want to be able to look at myself and say, I handled this. I'm proud of myself. I helped other people handle it. It's something that I want to do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I had a hard time at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So being able to bounce back from adversity, meaning you heard something that was very, very upsetting, and you're supposed to have that negative side of the emotional spectrum also. And then being able to say, yes, that is really true. And right now, part of my responsibility is to actually help myself feel a little bit better. So we're not just talking big picture resilience of when this is all over. We're talking on a daily basis where I can literally pick myself up after I've had a hard time, and certainly where I can help other people. And when we learn about resilience and this ability to bounce back, one of the big contributing factors to that is optimism, okay? Optimism is a belief that Imret Hashem, the future will be positive, and that there are things that I can do to help myself in the here and now. And there are people who are naturally more optimistic. those people very often are more self-aware, but there are people who can build that level of optimism, and that's actually what we're going to look at on the next page. People who are resilient are people who often have not only connections in terms of relationships, but are spiritually connected to something else and feel that they have a goal and a mission. Okay. Okay. With that being said, let's go on to the next slide. So optimism is something that we can learn. Okay, so we spoke about the thinking traps before. And quite frankly, they're real. Everybody experiences them. So challenging overly pessimistic beliefs and reframing them, like, I'm stuck in my house. That's true. But thinking I'm stuck in my house is not actually helpful. So I can reframe it and I can say to myself, look, I'm in my house, but I'm in my house to protect myself and to protect others. And that's a very, very different way of looking at it. So challenging overly pessimistic beliefs, one, we have to remind ourselves, when we think catastrophic thoughts, we actually don't have nevuah, and we don't know that the things that we're thinking of that are so catastrophic are actually going to happen. And we have to remind ourselves that in all likelihood, good things are going to happen. And people will be able to get through this situation, despite the fact that things are extremely difficult and extremely difficult for individuals. Okay, now people who are optimists, they learn how to see stressors as challenges and problems that can be solved as opposed to threats. And that's a very complicated way of thinking about things. We have real stressors in our life. They're real. The question is, what can we do about them? Which is really the goal that I have in this presentation, to recognize that in many situations, there are specific things that we can do, if only to make myself feel better by calling a good friend or tasting a piece of chocolate or having a warm tea or doing something that I really enjoy. Okay, along with that comes identifying those elements that you can control in your life. It feels like everything is out of control. Baruch Hashem, not everything is out of control, and there are things that I can do. Okay, using humor as a way to cope, we spoke about that, and it's extremely helpful. It's not always natural. And believing in yourself, that's the optimistic outlook. I believe that I can tolerate this. Tolerating this doesn't mean that I'm never going to feel sad or I'm never going to feel scared. It means that even when I'm sad or scared, I'm going to help myself so that I can get to the other side of that. I'm not going to let those negative emotions destroy me. Okay, and we're going to finally develop a realistic and optimistic way to look at things. It's very, very hard here, but reminding ourselves that we're not in control, reminding ourselves that while we can help make certain aspects of our lives feel that much better, but ultimately it's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I think that is something that can be very, very grounding and helpful. Okay, so with that, I want to go back to the idea of gratitude. Okay, gratitude is something, again, that we're not only obviously reaching out and telling a friend that I'm really happy that or it made a very big difference to me today. I used something that you got me X number of years ago, and I'm extremely grateful that you thought of buying it then, and now I feel good about it. But it's also gratitude to Hashem for the things that we actually really do have. We do know that when people really engage in that kind of ongoing gratitude, the need for material things actually goes down. And I'm bringing that up here because the reality of material limits now is a very, very real limit. It also helps people who are genuinely grateful to others and grateful to Hashem. It helps them actually reach out and help others. That aspect, again, like optimism, gratitude is a skill that can be built, and it involves helping ourselves by hunting for the things in our lives that are actually positive and that we can actually do to help others. Okay, with that, I come to the end of the presentation. And I hope that you found some of what I said entertaining, if not useful. But I hope that you actually found some of it useful also. It certainly was helpful to me when I was thinking about these things when I was preparing. And I want to wish you all a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, and thank Reb Steinig for doing this. And okay, that's really it.
I want to thank you so much, Dr. Berger, for taking the time out to speak to us. This was, I think, helpful to everybody. And I think a lot of this material everybody can share with their families. Again, if anybody wants copies of the PowerPoint, I am hearing some background noise. If anybody wants any copy, just email me at steinig@ou.org. That was on the chat to everybody, so you have it, steinig@ou.org. We are planning to continue this programming after Pesach, so stay tuned. And if you didn't get regular emails from the OU about it, again, email me so that we can add you to the list. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Berger. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
Chag Hashanah Sameach to everyone, and stay healthy and be safe. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.